this video, we're going to go over multiple joins. So this is joining more than just two tables together. So for example, if I was asked to assemble all information necessary to create an invoice for order number 2, I would need to look at all the different tables that are going to include invoice information. So we need to know who created the order in the first place, so that's the customer. We know that order is involved. We need to know what products were included on that order, so products involved. Additionally, to connect order to product, we need to have order line. So we're going to join all 4 of these tables together. So in the from clause, you can see I say from customer, I give it an alias of C. Then I do inner join order with an alias of O. On O.customerID equals C.customerID because order connects to customer. Then I'm going to inner join order line with an alias of OL. On O.orderID equal to OL.orderID because order and order line are connected. And then finally, I'm going to inner join product P on OL.productID equals P.productID because product and order line are connected together. Then finally, I want to only see those results where the order ID equals 2, so I'm going to say where O.orderID equals 2. And the reason why I include the alias O before the order ID is because order ID exists in 2 tables, in the order table and in the order line table, and I need to distinguish between which table that order ID is going to be pulled from. Then in the select clause, I'm going to pull all the information I want to display. So I'm going to say C.star and include all the customer information, O.orderID, O.order date, OL.quantity, P.description, P.price, and then finally I want to get the subtotal, so that's going to be OL.quantity times P.price as subtotal. We don't need the table aliases in front of all these columns that I've included in the select. As long as they're the only column with that name, you don't need to include the alias. So the only columns I need to have the alias in front are first the C.star, because that's going to pull all the customer information, and the O.orderID to pull that from the order table. The rest, those columns are not duplicated across multiple tables, and I would not need to include the table alias. Alright, so here we are back at the server. I'm going to go ahead and run this query. And we can see that we now have assembled the invoice. We see that only the information associated with order ID number 2 has been included. We have product information, we have order line information, we have order information, and finally we have the customer information. So now try this learning activity on your own. So complete these 8 queries, pause this video, and then come back to compare your answers. Alright, welcome back. I've gone ahead and copied the queries over and commented them out. Now I'm going to go ahead and answer this first one, which asks us to show the location of the work center where each product is worked on and show similar columns only once. So since it asked me to show similar columns only once, I know that I'll need to use a natural join if there's only one similar column across each table, or I could use the keyword using with an inner join. Let's go to our entity relationship diagram to see which tables are involved. So we want to know the location, so that comes from work center, and then we're also interested in products. So that means that we will need to include work center product in order to get from work center to product. So I'm going to join these 3 tables together. So I'm going to say select location, as well as we want to see where each product was worked on. So I'm going to say product.star to include all the product information. Then I'm going to say from product. I don't need to include table aliases because I'm going to use a natural join. And I'll natural join work center product. And then I'll natural join work center. And let's go ahead and run this query. And we can see the location is in the Tampa warehouse, and all of these products are associated with that location. This next query asks us to show employees in the work center locations they work at. So let's go to our ERD, and we can see employee is what we're interested in, and that connects to the work center through employee work center. So I'm going to join these 3 tables together. So I'm going to select, and I want to see all employee information. So I'm going to say employee.star, and then I also want the location. And I'm going to select this from employee, and I'm going to use an inner join this time. So I'm going to use E. So that means I'm going to change this from employee to E. And then I'll do inner join employee work center, and I'll do EWC on E.employee ID equals EWC.employee ID. And then I'll inner join this to work center, and I'll give this an alias of WC on WC.workcenter ID equals EWC.workcenter ID. I'll go ahead and run this query. And we can see that Phil Morris and Robert Lewis work at the main sawmill and the Tampa warehouse. Alright, for this next query, we're asked to show all payments made by a customer with CO in its name. So let's go to the entity relationship diagram, and we want to get the payment information and the customer information, so we need to include the order table as well. So I'm going to select star from the payment table. I'll give this an alias of P. We'll inner join this to the order table, so I'll give that an alias alias of O. Remember to put order in tick marks. On P dot order ID, because that's what connects to the order table, equals O dot order ID. And then I'm going to inner join this to customer. I'll give it an alias of C. On C dot customer ID equals O dot customer ID. And then finally, we're looking for customers with CO in its name. So we'll say where name like, and then in quotes we'll have it percentage CO and then percentage at the end. And we'll go ahead and run this query. And we see that there are 6 payments from 3 different customers who all have CO in their customer name. All right, this next question asks us to list all employees who can use a router and then show the employee name, description, and qualify dates. So let's go to our entity relationship diagram, and we're interested in employees that can use the router. So description is where we're going to find router. So I'm going to join skill to employee, skill to employee. So we're going to select, and the columns I want to select are first name, last name for the employee name, and then I want the description, which is going to come from the skill table, and I want the qualify date, which is going to come from the employee skill table. So I'm going to say from employee, and I'm going to give this an alias of E, and I'll do an inner join employee skill ES on E dot employee ID equals ES dot employee ID, and then I'll do another inner join skill, and then I'll give this an alias of S on S dot skill ID equals es.skill ID. Finally, I want to see only those employees that can use the router. So I'm going to say where description equals router. I'm going to go ahead and run this query. And we can see that 2 employees know how to use the router. All right, let's go to this next query where we're asked to list the salesperson and the territory they work in that made order number 19. So let's go to the entity relationship diagram, and we see that salesperson is connected to territory, as well as I want to know which salesperson made the order number 19. So we're going to connect these 3 tables together. So I'm going to select star from territory, and I'll give this an alias of T, and then I'll inner join salesperson with an alias of S on T.territory ID equals S.territory ID. And then I'll inner join order, put that in tick marks, give that an alias of O on S.salesperson ID equals O.salesperson ID. And then finally, I want only those that made the order number 19. So I'll say where order ID equals 19. And we'll go ahead and run this query. And we can see that William Strong is the salesperson located in the Northeast Territory that made the sale of order number 19. All right, let's go to the next query where we're asked to show all customers that do business in the Central Territory. So let's go to the entity relationship diagram. And then we're going to look at the customer table. And we want to know those that do business in the Central Territory. So to get from customer to territory, I'm going to use the customer territory table. So I'm going to use these 3 tables. So I'm going to select star from customer, and I'll give that an alias of C, and then I'll inner join customer territory with an alias of CT on C.customer ID equals CT.customer ID, and then I'll inner join territory with an alias of T on CT.territory ID equals T.territory ID, and then I'm only interested in those who do business in the Central Territory, so I'll say where T.name equals central. And the reason why I needed to include T in front of name is customer also has a field of name, and I'm using T to distinguish that I'm pulling from the territory table instead of from the customer table. So I'm going to go ahead and run this query. Okay, so now we can see that the customer is included here, and then we have the territory, which is central. So Impressions is the only customer that does business in the Central Territory. All right, this next query asks us to show each customer and the total number and total cost of orders that include a table or desk and have a total between $1,500 and $5,000. We're then asked to use total number and total cost as aliases for the aggregated columns. So let's go to our entity relationship diagram to determine which tables we need. We need the customer table, and then order information, and then in order to get table or desk, we need the product table. So we're going to be joining product to order line and order line to order and ordered customer. So let's go ahead and start this query with the from clause. So I'm going to say from customer C, and then I'll inner join that to the order table O. Make sure we put that in tick marks on C.customer ID equals O.customer ID. Inner join that to the order line table with an alias of OL on O.order ID equals OL.order ID. And then I'll inner join that that to product p on ol.product ID equals p.product ID. So now what I want to do is show each customer. So I'm going to select c.star, and then I want the total number and the total cost of order. So I'm going to count the order ID, and this order ID comes from the O table. And then I also want the sum of price from the product table times quantity from the order line table. And then I'm going to give this first column an alias of total number, so as total number, and then this second column an alias of total cost, so as total cost. Additionally, since I have non-aggregated columns with aggregated columns, I need to do a group by. So I'm going to say group by, and then I'm going to group by c.customer ID. And the reason why I'm grouping by customer ID is because I want to see for each customer. Additionally, it says that I want only those that include a table or desk. So in the where statement, I'm going to say where description like, and then I'll put in between percentages table, and then I'll say or description like, and then I'll put in percentages desk. And then I want to know for the entire order where the total cost is between 1,500 and 5,000. So since this is now a grouped record, I'm going to add a having clause, and I'm going to say having the sum of price times quantity between 1,500 and $5,000. I'll go ahead and run this query. And we can see the customer information and the total number of orders they placed that have a cost between $1,500 and $5,000. This last query asks us to remove the payment made with cash from ABC Furniture. So this is going to use a delete query. And deletes are unique. What's different here is I'm going to say delete payment from payment. So the fact that I have the table listed twice is what's different here. And then when I go to the ERD, and we are dealing with payment and customer, so I'm going to join these three tables together. So I'm going to do an inner join with order, put that in tick marks, and then I'm going to say on payment.orderID equals order.orderID, and then I'm going to inner join that to customer on order.customerID equals customer.customerID. And then I want only those with ABC Furniture Company and cash. So I'm going to say where comment equals cash and name equals ABC Furniture Company. I'm going to go ahead and run this query, and you can see that the query was successfully executed and one row was affected.